I'm sure that everyone in this room is familiar with, if not the practice of mindfulness, at least the word mindfulness. It's hard to avoid in our culture, our world anymore, this encouragement to just be more mindful in our lives, to be more awake, more present, more engaged, more curious. I think what's not always understood is that mindfulness is always part of an extended family, that mindfulness is never a standalone quality, but that it's always developed simultaneously with these other family members. I think mindfulness without this extended family is probably something more akin to attention training. And that's actually not what mindfulness is concerned with. So the extended family of mindfulness is actually quite large. But the Brahmaviharas, these 4 qualities, are very much a part of that extended family. And sati, or mindfulness, looks to that family for development and for cultivation. Now, I'd like to speak about how these qualities were talked about by the Buddha in the early days, these qualities of boundless friendliness, joyfulness, compassion, and equanimity. First of all, the Buddha spoke about these as being virtues. They are guidelines to a life of integrity, a life of harmlessness, of non-harming, and a life of respect. There's a wonderful teaching from the Tibetan tradition that says, "Wherever my gaze may fall, may it be filled with tenderness and respect." That would be quite a way to live, wouldn't it? That wherever my gaze may fall, may it be filled with tenderness and respect. So the Buddha spoke of a life infused with these qualities as a life of integrity, of non-harming, of honesty, of truthfulness, of restraint, and of caring. And as many of you will know, in the Buddhist teaching, this level of integrity or ethics is considered to be the foundation of all development. I had, he wasn't exactly a colleague, a rather stern Burmese teacher once said, "How can you expect to deepen in meditation without ethics? Because without ethics, all you're doing is providing the conditions for unpleasant and difficult mind states to arise." And I think there is just actually so much truth in this. The Buddha also spoke about these qualities as being seeds of potentiality that live within each of our hearts and minds. So all of us have the capacity and the potentiality to really begin to nurture these qualities. For those of you who are new, I think it's also good just to reframe this word meditation. It's a translation of a Pali word, bhavana, which means to cultivate or to bring into being. To bring into being. There's nothing passive about this. These qualities are not something that belong to an elite few or those who live in caves or monasteries. These are part of the human landscape, the landscape of our own hearts and minds. And this word cultivation is so important because if you just reflect that the time of the Buddha was very much an agricultural and agrarian society. So people would know what it meant to grow something, to grow something and to provide the conditions for seeds to flourish. To provide the conditions for seeds to flourish. He also spoke about these qualities as fruitions. You might think, what would the mind of a Buddha look like? What would the heart of a Buddha look like? And how it's spoken of is that an awakened mind is one that is truly infused and permeated with these qualities. The Buddha uses the word unshakable. So if they're not episodic, they're not momentary, they're not lucky accidents, that these seeds of potentiality are nurtured and brought to fruition. And as such, they are pathways. They are pathways. Something we cultivate as much as we would cultivate mindfulness or attention or awareness. We learn actually to cultivate them in a very intentional way. Now, the cultivation of these qualities really rests upon intention, just as any aspect of inner development rests upon intention. These are also intentional cultivations in our practice and in our lives. They're not about, and I really want to say this, I know sometimes it's a bit provocative, they're not about how we feel. Sometimes when people hear about these qualities of, boundless kindness and joyfulness and compassion and equanimity, they think they're going to be, these lovely, lovely feelings are going to be bathed in, they're going to be sunbeams of friendliness, and celebrating joyfulness moment to moment. It is true that these qualities can have an affective tone. We actually know the affective tone of being touched by friendliness or, feeling a sense of warmth and kindness towards another. It has an affective tone in our hearts. It's unmistakable. Joyfulness obviously can have a very strong affective tone, a lightness, a gladness, an appreciation, a gratitude. Compassion can have a very affective tone, as can equanimity actually. But the cultivation of these practices is not an endeavor to recover the affective tone. They're an endeavor to sustain the intention of befriending, the intention of appreciating, the intention of compassion, the intention of equanimity, about learning to sustain these intentions, often in moments when the affective tone is not present. Those are the crucial moments. What it is to sustain those intentions when the affective tone is not present. What is it to sustain the intention of befriending in the midst of ill will? What is it to cultivate the intention of appreciation in moments of bleakness or despair? What is it to cultivate and sustain the intention of compassion in those moments of numbness or distance or estrangement? And what is it to really nurture and sustain the intention of equanimity in those moments in our lives when we feel most reactive and most off balance? So it's not always, it's not always greeted with enthusiasm when I say, you don't have to feel kind to act and to speak with kindness. You don't have to feel joyful in order to open your heart and mind to appreciate. You don't have to feel compassion in order to reach out and to help another, or to serve another, or support another. I think it's so, some people will say, well, that means it's not authentic. But it's not about how we feel. This is about how we engage and how we live. And beginning to see in the midst of those classrooms of aversion and reactivity and numbness, there is another pathway we can follow. rather than going down those old, all too familiar routes that lead to division and to alienation. Think of the many instances in life where that would make a difference, where that would actually make a difference, to reach out, to befriend, to care, rather than to turn away or ignore. Now, these are very interrelated qualities, okay? There's a teaching again from one of the Tibetan traditions. It says, out of the soil of friendliness grows the beautiful bloom of compassion, watered by the tears of joy and shaded by the cool tree of equanimity. They are relational qualities, and they actually need each other to function well. We can see that metta very much guards, because of its boundless nature of befriending, that metta guards compassion from partiality, from any sense that something or one thing is worthy of compassion and another is not. Metta, this kindness, imparts equanimity with this very selfless, boundless, caring nature. And compassion protects metta and joyfulness from forgetfulness. You know, the gladdened heart remembers actually the immensity of suffering in our world and stirs friendliness to really widen the field of concern. And compassion certainly guards equanimity from falling into indifference. Joy resources us, resources compassion. It protects the heart from being overwhelmed by the immensity of pain in the world. Now, some of you are probably have some familiarity with these practices and how they're spoken about in the text in different ways. Now, in one of the commentaries, one of the most famous commentaries on the Buddhist teaching, you find these qualities listed under the concentration section. And what is encouraged in that commentary is probably the familiar way of practice that some of you have encountered, where you repeat certain phrases over and over again. You know, may you be peaceful, may I be peaceful, may you be caring, may I be caring. And you're kind of very loyal to the repetition of those phrases. Now, do bear in mind that the Buddha was pretty much prescription-free in terms of meditation practices. You know, much of this came in with the commentarial tradition. Now, if you do that repetition of those phrases, which are kind of your articulated intentions, if you do that over and over again, it has an effect. You know, it does focus the mind, it gathers the mind, and in some way, it protects the mind from endlessly spinning off into stories and narratives. So that is the virtue. But I find it hard to find any supporting evidence in the early teachings that these qualities are about concentration. They're mostly concerned, in my reading, my understanding, and my own practice, with deepening in understanding and healing. Healing some of these most powerful patterns in our own hearts and minds, in the minds of, so many hearts and minds. Healing these patterns of greed and hatred and confusion that create so much suffering and so much despair and so much divisiveness. And in the understanding or responding to these divisive patterns, they are primarily concerned with insight and with awakening the heart and awakening the mind. And this is just a personal opinion that I can see the value of using these practices as a way of protecting the mind from straying into fields that are really not helpful. But these practices are really just not concerned with the shape of my mind and heart. These practices and these cultivations are most deeply concerned with how we engage with all hearts and minds, and what we can do to contribute to relieving and easing some of the despair and the suffering that we see in life. In the Metta discourse, the Buddha describes this quality of boundless kindness as a sati, as a mindfulness, and actually uses some of the very same refrain that you find in the teaching of establishing mindfulness, where he says, whether standing or sitting or walking or lying down, to cultivate this intention of kindness, of befriending. That this is the most noble way of living in this world. In the early teachings, very central to the teaching of the Buddha is waking up. Really understanding what it means to be an awakened human being, not in the grip of compulsions, not in the grip of reactivity, but to know a sublime peace and a sublime happiness and a sublime well-being and understanding. And the Buddha speaks about waking up, this awakened mind, in a whole number of different ways. There was never talked about there being just one pathway. He actually speaks about the liberated heart as a city with many pathways leading into the city. He speaks about awakening through faith, through confidence. He speaks about awakening through insight and through understanding the emptiness of solidity in all things. And he speaks about Ceto Vimutti, the awakening of the heart. And this pathway into the liberated heart is most often associated with the Brahmaviharas. As I've mentioned, it raises the question, this cultivation raises for me the question of, how do I want to live? What kind of footprint do I want to make upon the world? What kind of footprint do I want to leave in my own heart and mind? And of course, the great gift, I think, of this teaching is the discovery that we have choices here. That, ill will or anxiety or despair or craving, these are not life sentences. They're absolutely not life sentences. That we have choices about what pathways we want to cultivate, what kind of footprint we actually aspire to leaving upon the world. Mindfulness, the first introduction of ourselves to mindfulness teaches us about those choices, don't we? Doesn't it? In this moment, I have a choice about whether I attend to the palm of my hand or to seeing the pictures on the wall. I have that choice. I also increasingly have choices about the quality of attention that I will bring to any given moment. So it is about what we want to be guiding our speech and our thoughts and our actions. As the Buddha put it in the Dhammapada, one of the most loved early collections of teachings, he says, it's not difficult for us to engage in acts that undermine our well-being. It is far more difficult for us to cultivate qualities and ways of being that lead us to thrive. Isn't it true? I don't have to work really hard to be irritated. I don't really have to work very hard to be impatient. I don't have to think, is there a roadmap here? Does someone know how to be impatient or frustrated or, ill will? We don't have to work very hard, do we? I don't have, we might not have to work very hard to be lost in narratives or in fantasies, right? Or stories. Isn't it true that it actually takes far more effort and intention for us to truly cultivate a way of life that's not governed by habit? It's not governed by emotional habit or, all of the habits that can permeate our lives. This takes far more effort. It's a dedication, but it's a dedication of love. The Buddha once said that it's a disciplined heart that knows true joyfulness. And when he speaks about a disciplined heart, he's not talking about a command structure or shouting at ourselves, but a discipline of dedication and passion. I think the early roots of the word discipline is to follow what you love. To follow what you love. And I think probably in this room we would all agree that we have a certain draw towards kindness, joyfulness, compassion, and equanimity. So this has something about swimming against the tide. Swimming against the tide, swimming against the tide of societal norms, where we're living in cultures where ill will to some extent becomes kind of naturalized or normalized, where craving can become kind of normalized, naturalized, it's swimming against the tide of those societal norms. But it's also swimming against the tide, I think, of our own habit patterns, our own stories, our own patterns of reactivity and fear and ill will. I used to teach in a university, and some of you have heard me use this example before, in the psychology department. And, all of the offices for the professors and staff were all on one hallway. And at the end of each end of the hallway, there was a kitchen. And, one kitchen, like most institutions, gets papered with Post-it notes, And one of the kitchens, you went in and the Post-it notes were everywhere on the cupboards, don't use my tea bag, leave a dirty cup at your peril, and the milk is mine, and clean up after yourself, And at the other end of the kitchen, it was also Post-it notes everywhere, help yourself to tea bag, I brought in a tin of biscuits today, feel free, don't worry about cleaning up, I'll do a run through at the end of the day. And I used to think of these as being the happy kitchen and the unhappy kitchen, and which kitchen do I want to live in, which kitchen really do I want to live in? It's very easy to live in the unhappy kitchen.